for example, on the grounds that it was, you know, a bastion of liberalism. And I think there's a general suspicion of overt and significant government support of what we do. At the same time, the kind of the sentiment among editors and publishers and you know, heads of news organizations that you know, the market is the only way to go has also relaxed a bit in recent years. We've become, out of necessity, open to other kinds of experimentation. I mentioned a few of them at the outset. Philanthropic organizations supporting investigative journalism or local journalism with which we've done joint ventures.
Ezio, let me ask you, since you live in a world, as you just described, where it's almost the locus classicus of the dangers of mingling the public sector and the media sector, does this kind of idea worry you?
But you must consider that only 7% of readers of newspapers in Italy receive at home the newspaper by subscription. So 93% choose every day to stop their car, to go to the kiosk, to choose at this, to look at this invasion of paper and to point his finger and say, I want this newspaper, and say this day 65 days per year, for year and year and year. Do you know some other cultural organization with this strong power with the people? And McLuhan said that this is the only contract that can be destroyed only by decision of one part every day without communication to the other part. So the relationship between a newspaper and the citizens, it's very, very strong, also in this period. And it's very important when the situation of general audience is particular, because in our country, you must know that 63.9% in the last European election chose the last decision for vote by television.
So is this a suitable area for public policy, and if so, what should the public policy be?
But I think that so that we call the conflict of interest is the first problem in Italy. Is it impossible that the man who controls the government and the principal party of Italy, the majority of the parliament, controls also the universe of TV, the universe of TV.
But let's say we could fix that problem. Would you favor some kind of public subsidy or other intervention to address the problem Paul's talking about, of just a lack of support for journalism?
There's not general support for journalism. The Post doesn't work very well in Italy, and so it's quite unuseful to have a subscription to newspapers. You receive your newspaper in the afternoon, it's unuseful at that time. So the question is the very important question, not only for Italy, but I think for democracy. It's impossible that the large majority of population follow the TV also for vote, and one person controls the entire universe of TV. It's not normal.
So
it's not normal. And he has a public open attitude against the press.
So
against the press.
Let's talk about solutions to that problem. So in the United States, well, everywhere in the world, broadcast is regulated to some extent. In the United States, it's gone from being fairly heavily regulated to quite lightly regulated. In other words, our construct, unlike most of the rest of the Western world, when radio and television first came on, was to say, we will put this into private hands entirely, but there's a kind of social compact involved. The government is giving airwaves to private holders, and they have to do something public-spirited and comport themselves in various ways in return. That all went away. We created a small public broadcasting sector in the 60s and 70s, and then in the 80s, when Ronald Reagan was president, substantially deregulated our broadcast system. That's one of the small causes of the conservative populist Bill was talking about, is never bring back a vanished piece of regulation called the Fairness Doctrine, which essentially ordered broadcasters to speak in a sort of calm, reasoned voice of the kind we've been holding up as the ideal for journalism on this panel. And they think that's a limit on free speech, basically. So there's kind of two categories of ways to deal with the Berlusconi problem, if I may call it that. One is structural regulation, and one is behavioral regulation. In structural regulation, the model is, that's what most of the sort of media reform types want in the United States. It's having very severe or moderately severe ownership limits, saying no one entity can control electronic media in X% of the country, within localities. They can't have monopolies. They can't cross-own newspapers and television. So that's the structural side. The behavioral side is things like the aforementioned Fairness Doctrine, where you say, if you own a broadcast license, you must behave in certain ways journalistically. Are you for either, both, neither in Italy and elsewhere?
But you speak about the necessity of a regulation in this very sensitive market that is a market of consensus, is the place for public opinion, this subject of Western democracy. But you know that it's very difficult to regulate this market if the subject who makes the law is the same subject of, which use the laws to maintain this conflict of interest, and this power, this is not a correct power against the other parties.
Right.
Yes, I mean, Italy is a lesson for all the rest of us about what not to allow.
So, right, but that's what I'm trying to get to is I'm guessing, just using my reporter's sixth sense, that you might prefer to have a different prime minister. But, but what would you do structurally in media law and regulation to prevent this kind of situation from happening again, or any of you? Or would you do nothing and just get a new prime minister?
Well, I think we need competition law, antitrust law to prevent that kind of ownership. But there's another problem, I think, which we were actually talking about before we came on stage, and that is that in many countries in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, there is a spread of an unfortunate Russian model with oligarchs taking over the media. And that is a related pathology where newspapers are not profitable, they're run at a loss, and they're only run for the sake of the political power that can be achieved through them. And one of the things I worry about, even in the United States, is as newspapers become unprofitable, they may increasingly come under the control of people who only buy them because they can, in effect, use them for political gain, to intimidate their opponents, and that could corrupt the media in many other places. So the profitability of the media is in part a protection against this kind of control.
Bill has a relatively new competitor of whom some such motives are suspected. The Wall Street Journal has started publishing a New York section, which is thought to be a money loser, but a power builder. So, and the same is true of the New York Post, and the same may be true of the New York Daily News. So we've seen some of that, Bodo.
Well, I think listening to what you've just said, that's an observation that I have had in lots of other countries. I mean, we're in most countries of Southeastern Europe, represented also in Russia, that we see more and more that people who've made a lot of money with the process of transformation, privatization, they've made and earned their money in other areas. They buy their way into the media, not to pursue normal business, but to use the media for their own purposes, secure their own interests, I mean, protect them against prosecution. Often happens, and I think that is a trend that the European Union actually doesn't take too much notice of so far. Even though we have sent in resolutions, we have reported, we have informed, I think, the Council of Europe, not even the Council of Europe that is technically responsible and in charge here, hasn't put it on their agenda yet. When I go to Romania, for example, when we're talking to people and saying more and more oligarchs are buying newspapers. And when you say that to them, then they say, well, what about Sarkozy or Berlusconi? So you Europeans are nice and quiet. But I think we cannot keep up a civic society without free media. But it's like with air to breathe. I mean, when it's there, you just inhale and exhale and you don't notice. But when there is none, then you're suddenly in a dire situation. But I think this is something we need to counteract dramatically, drastically. And now we're not just talking about those media that are deficit spinners and basically just holes you can throw your money into. There are also profitable ones, proper ones. I think it's a development that I cannot see happening in my own home country, Germany, so far. And I think there has been promotion of the press in Austria. I always flinch when somebody suggests that media are produced by somebody other than just a media-minded entrepreneur. Because I always wonder, if he doesn't want a newspaper to make money with it, for God's sake, what is the other reason behind it? Political parties have a paper and it's fine, or the church. But when other private players come in, it's not obvious why they're doing it. Unless there is a business purpose, we should be extremely worried. I do see a schism opening up here, and I think that's a schism that is noxious for a positive development of our society. I think people really are looking for good quality information. Good quality media are increasing their numbers of copies sold. I mean, many Germans vote for €1 a call who is going to leave a jungle camp or becomes a superstar, but they don't understand why they aren't asked to vote when a building is being built that will cost them 40 million. I think there is a movement with a real quest for background information, proper knowledge to then take an informed decision, and that can only be furnished by media, proper media. So this contact with the truth that journalists technically have is held in high esteem, and we must not ever lose that, because that is also the basis for the sellability of a paper. We experience that journalism that doesn't do all the normal things, entertains people, keeps them interested, but journalists that fight for the interests of citizens actually get